welcome to today's video. Tonight, we're embarking on a profound healing journey that will gently guide you into the deepest, most restorative sleep while simultaneously addressing one of the most pervasive challenges in adult life, the unconscious. Patterns and beliefs we inherited during childhood that continue to run our lives decades later. If you've ever wondered why you repeat certain relationship patterns, why you struggle with self-worth despite your accomplishments, why you feel like you're constantly performing for others' approval, or why authentic self-expression feels so challenging, this story is specifically designed to help you understand and transform those deep-rooted programs beyond the veil of ordinary perception. In a place where time moves like honey and healing flows like crystalline streams, stories live that mirror the deepest truths of human experience. These are not mere tales, but living frequencies of transformation, carrying within their narrative DNA the codes for liberation from patterns that no longer serve the magnificent being you have become. Through the portal of imagination, where the impossible becomes possible and the wounded finds wholeness, your journey toward freedom unfolds. Here, in this sacred storytelling space, the unconscious programs running beneath your daily awareness rise to the surface like secrets whispered by trusted friends, ready to be witnessed, understood, and ultimately transformed in dimensions. Unseen by waking eyes, but felt by the eternal soul, healing stories emerge from the quantum field of infinite possibility. These narratives carry within them the blueprint for your liberation, encoded with the precise frequencies needed to dissolve the limiting beliefs that were never truly yours to begin with, beliefs inherited from generations past, absorbed in moments of childhood vulnerability, crystallized into invisible cages that the adult you need no longer inhabit. Where consciousness meets the mystery of sleep, transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The very act of listening with an open heart creates neural pathways of possibility, rewiring the ancient circuitry of limitation into networks of empowerment. Tonight, through the alchemy of story and the magic of metaphor, the programs that have been running your life from the shadows step into the light of loving awareness. In the sacred space of narrative, beyond the boundaries of linear time, your character emerges not as fiction, but as reflection, not as fantasy, but as pathway to your own healing. This being who will journey through landscapes of transformation carries within their fictional form the essence of your real liberation, moving through challenges that mirror your own, discovering wisdom that becomes your wisdom, finding freedom that translates into your freedom. The ethereal realm where this story unfolds operates by different laws than ordinary reality. Here, breakthrough happens in single moments of recognition. Here, decades of conditioning can unravel through one profound insight. Here, the child who learned to survive through adaptation meets the adult who can thrive through authentic expression. Here, the scripts written in another time, another context, another version of you can be edited, revised, and ultimately rewritten entirely. As we prepare to enter this transformative narrative space, feel your consciousness naturally beginning to soften like butter warming in sunlight, ready to receive whatever medicine this story holds for your particular pattern of limitation. The healing that awaits is not generic, but specifically calibrated to the unique signature of your soul's journey, addressing precisely what most needs attention in this approval. The script running. Elena's adult life was written when she was 7 years old, sitting at a kitchen table covered in homework, while her mother's voice carried that particular tone of disappointed exasperation. "Elena, if you would just try harder, you could be so much better. Look at your sister, she never needs help with anything. Why can't you be more like her?" These words, spoken in a moment of maternal frustration, became Elena's internal programming, the core belief that would shape decades of striving, performing, and never quite feeling enough. Now, as an accomplished artist whose work graces galleries throughout the region, Elena still hears that 7-year-old script playing on endless repeat. Before every exhibition opening, she experiences waves of anxiety that leave her nauseated and trembling. When collectors praise her work, she immediately thinks of ways it could have been better. When other artists share their successes, Elena's chest tightens with a familiar sense of inadequacy that tastes like copper pennies in childhood. The cottage where Elena lives alone reflects her internal landscape. Beautiful, but somehow hollow, filled with exquisite furniture that no one ever uses. Perfectly arranged flowers that remain unsmelled. Gourmet meals prepared for one that are eaten in silence while scrolling through others. Seemingly perfect alignment of your evolution. Through the gossamer threads of imagination, we step now into a world where liberation lives, where the impossible becomes everyday reality, where the scripts that have been unconsciously directing your life's drama are revealed not as permanent fixtures, but as temporary programs that can be updated, upgraded, and ultimately transcended entirely. In a coastal village where morning fog dances between weathered cottages and ancient oak, trees stretch their limbs toward endless sky, lives Elena, a woman whose hands hold the gift of bringing beauty into existence through delicate watercolor paintings. At 42, she moves through her days with a grace that masks an underlying tension, a subtle holding in her shoulders that speaks of invisible burdens, carried since childhood's early lessons about what it means to be worthy of love. Elena's studio overlooks the harbor, its wide windows framing fishing boats that bob like prayer beads on the restless sea. Her paintings capture moments of transcendent beauty: sunrise, breaking through storm clouds, children laughing as waves chase their bare feet, lovers walking hand in hand along the shoreline. Yet for all the joy she creates on canvas, Elena herself remains trapped within patterns established decades ago, in a suburban home where perfection was the price-offs on social media. She has created a sanctuary that doubles as a prison, a place where she can hide from the world that might discover she is not, in fact, the accomplished woman she appears to be, but rather that same 7-year-old girl who could never quite measure up. Elena's romantic relationships follow predictable patterns written by that ancient script. She attracts partners who withhold approval just enough to keep her striving. Men who seem perpetually on the verge of leaving unless she proves herself worthy through constant accommodation and self-abandonment. When they inevitably do leave, usually citing her neediness or insecurity, Elena experiences it as confirmation of the original wound. She is not enough. Never has been enough. Never will be enough. Her friendships, too, bear the fingerprints of childhood programming. Elena gives constantly, exhaustively, desperately, hosting elaborate dinner parties she cannot afford, remembering everyone's birthdays with expensive gifts, showing up for every crisis with casseroles and comfort, while her own needs remain perpetually unmet. She has become the friend everyone calls when they need something, rarely the friend anyone thinks to check on, simply because they care about her well-being. The invisible script governing Elena's life operates with mechanical precision. Scan environment for signs of disapproval. Adjust behavior to maximize acceptance. Minimize authentic expression to avoid rejection. Repeat endlessly. This program runs so constantly, so automatically, that Elena has forgotten it is a program at all. She experiences it as simply the way reality works, the natural order of things, the price that must be paid for belonging. Yet lately, something within Elena has begun to stir. Perhaps it is the approaching of her 43rd birthday that brings with it an undeniable awareness of time's passage. Perhaps it is the increasing exhaustion that comes from living a life that belongs more to a 7-year-old survival strategy than to a grown woman's authentic desires. Perhaps it is simply that the soul, like water, always seeks its natural level, and Elena's soul has grown weary of this artificial elevation of others' approval over her own inner knowing. Standing in her studio as morning light illuminates canvases Covered in beauty she has created but cannot fully receive, Elena finds herself asking questions that feel both terrifying and essential. What would happen if she stopped trying so hard to be perfect? What would emerge if she allowed herself to be seen in her authentic humanity? What relationships might be possible if she related from her truth rather than from her wound? These questions hang in the salt-tinged air like incense, sacred and frightening, carrying within them the seeds of transformation that could dissolve decades of limitation. Elena does not yet know that she stands at the threshold of profound liberation, that the very questioning itself has begun to loosen the grip of patterns established so long ago they feel like laws of nature rather than choices made by a child who is doing her best to survive in circumstances beyond her control. The script that has been running Elena's life is about to encounter the most powerful force in the universe. Conscious awareness lovingly applied to unconscious patterns. What will unfold in the coming journey is nothing less than the rewriting of her most fundamental programming, the liberation of her authentic self from the prison of inherited limitation, the emergence of a woman who knows her worth not through others' approval, but through the unshakable recognition of her own inherent imagination. The coastal village where Elena dwells exists in that liminal space where earth meets water, where solid ground gives way to endless possibility, where the eternal rhythm of tides mirrors the natural cycles of growth, release, and renewal that govern all transformative processes. This is not merely a geographical location, but a psychological landscape, a mirror realm where the external environment reflects the internal topography of healing, where every element carries symbolic significance that will support Elena's journey toward liberation. The harbor that Elena views from her studio window represents the threshold between conscious and unconscious awareness, that mysterious boundary where known meets unknown, where surface thoughts give way to the deeper currents of subconscious programming. The boats that rest at anchor embody the various aspects of Elena's identity, some weathered by storms of experience, others bright with fresh possibility, all capable of navigating the waters of transformation when guided by conscious intention, rather than unconscious compulsion. Ancient oak trees that line the village streets stand as witnesses to countless seasons of change, their deep roots speaking to the possibility of remaining grounded while reaching toward growth. Their broad canopies offering shelter for those ready to rest in the shade of their own hard-won wisdom. These trees carry in their rings the memory of droughts weathered, storms survived, seasons of plenty and seasons of scarcity, all navigated through an inherent trust in the natural process of becoming. The morning fog that regularly blankets the village serves as metaphor for the veil of unconsciousness that obscures the patterns running Elena's life. Like fog, these patterns are not solid or permanent, but rather temporary obscurations that naturally dissolve when met with the warmth of conscious awareness. The way sunlight gradually burns through the mist each morning demonstrates the inevitable triumph of illumination over confusion, clarity over complexity, truth over the stories we tell ourselves to justify our limitations. Elena's cottage itself embodies the constructed identity she has built around her wound. Beautiful on the surface, but somehow hollow at its core, perfectly appointed yet lacking in genuine warmth, designed more for others' approval than for her own comfort and joy. The unused furniture speaks to aspects of herself that remain unexpressed, the unsmelled flowers to pleasures deferred in service of others' expectations, the solitary meals to the isolation that comes from relating through performance rather than presence. Her art studio occupies the liminal space between private self and public expression, between inner vision and outer manifestation. The wide windows that frame the harbor view represent the possibility of perspective, the way conscious awareness can expand the field of vision beyond the narrow focus of survival-based programming. The canvas is covered in beauty she has created, but cannot fully receive, symbolize the gifts waiting to be claimed when she learns to see herself through eyes of love rather than criticism. The changing weather patterns that sweep regularly through this coastal realm mirror the emotional seasons that Elena will navigate in her journey toward healing. Storms represent the tumultuous periods when old patterns are breaking apart, when the familiar structures of identity feel unstable and threatening. Clear skies symbolize moments of breakthrough clarity, when truth pierces through confusion like sunlight through clouds. The gentle rains that nourish the village gardens reflect the tears of recognition that water the seeds of transformation. The tidal rhythms that govern this waterfront world speak to the natural ebb and flow of healing, the way growth happens. Not in straight lines, but in spirals. The way progress includes apparent regression. The way breakthrough often follows breakdown like sunrise follows the darkest hour of night. These tides carry away what no longer serves, while bringing in fresh possibilities with each cycle, demonstrating the ocean's endless capacity for renewal. Within this landscape, certain locations hold particular significance for Elena's transformative journey. The lighthouse that stands sentinel at the harbor's mouth represents the higher wisdom that can guide her safely through the rocky passages of change. Its steady beam cuts through fog and storm alike, offering navigation for those ready to trust their own inner light, rather than constantly seeking direction from external sources. The village square where community members gather for festivals and markets embodies the possibility of authentic connection, of belonging based on presence rather than performance. Here, Elena will eventually discover what it means to be valued for who she is rather than what she provides, to receive love without having to earn it through constant accommodation and self-abandonment. The walking paths that wind along the coastline offer metaphor for the non-linear nature of healing, the way the journey toward wholeness curves and meanders, sometimes circling back to familiar territory, but always from a higher perspective, always with greater understanding than before. These paths lead to hidden coves and secret gardens, to places of beauty and refuge that can only be discovered by those willing to venture beyond the well-traveled routes of conventional existence. The seasonal changes that transform this landscape throughout the year reflect the various phases Elena will move through in her liberation process. Winter's dormancy speaks to the necessary periods of rest and reflection. Spring's emergence to the tender beginnings of new growth. Summer's abundance to the full flowering of authentic expression. Autumn's harvest to the wisdom gathered from lived experience. This village exists in sacred time as well as ordinary time, operating by the deeper rhythms of soul growth rather than merely the mechanical ticking of clocks. Here, healing happens according to its own perfect timing, unfolding at the precise pace needed for integration, sustainable transformation, and lasting liberation. Here, the impossible becomes inevitable when met with patient love and conscious awareness. In this carefully crafted environment, Elena's journey toward freedom will unfold with the inevitability of dawn breaking over water, as natural and necessary as breathing, as profound and lasting as the ocean's eternal song of change within continuity, growth within stability, liberation within love. Elena's days unfold with the precision of a choreographed dance, each movement guided by invisible programming that operates beneath the surface of conscious awareness like an underground river determining the course of surface streams. Her morning ritual begins at 5:30 am, not because she naturally wakes at this hour, but because somewhere in her psyche lives the belief that early rising equals virtue, that productivity before sunrise somehow compensates for the fundamental inadequacy she carries like a stone in her chest. Standing before her bathroom mirror, Elena performs the daily archaeology of perfection examining, a reflection for flaws that must be corrected before she can safely present herself to the world. Each gray hair discovered becomes evidence of diminishing value, every fine line. Proof that she's losing the battle against time's relentless judgment. She applies makeup with the careful precision of a warrior donning armor. Each brushstroke designed to hide rather than enhance, to create an acceptable facade rather than reveal authentic beauty. Her morning routine extends to checking her phone. Obsessively, scrolling through social media feeds that trigger waves of comparison and inadequacy with mathematical reliability. Elena's chest tightens as she views others' curated presentations of success, romance and fulfillment images that activate the 7-year-olds. Certainty that everyone else has figured out the secret to happiness while she remains perpetually behind, perpetually trying to catch up to a finish line that moves just beyond her reach. The drive to her studio becomes a meditation on failure, her mind automatically cataloging yesterday's mistakes and inadequacies. Did she talk too much at dinner with Sarah? Should she have agreed to that commission she's not sure she can complete perfectly? Why did she hesitate when the gallery owner mentioned possibly featuring her work in the prestigious summer exhibition? Each self-interrogation carries the familiar flavor of that childhood kitchen table. That moment when love became conditional upon performance. In her studio, Elena's creative process reflects the same pattern of self-sabotage disguised as perfectionism. She begins each painting with genuine enthusiasm, connecting to the beauty she wants to capture. But within minutes, the internal critic awakens, commenting on every brushstroke with the same voice that once told a 7-year-old she needed to try harder. Colors become wrong, compositions amateur, expressions forced. What began as play transforms into work, then into struggle, then into evidence of her fundamental inadequacy as an artist. Her relationship with clients reveals another layer of the programming. Elena systematically undercharges for her work, unconsciously believing that fair compensation would be presumptuous, that asking for what she's worth would expose her as greedy or entitled. When clients suggest changes to commission pieces, she agrees immediately, regardless of how the modifications compromise her artistic vision. The customer is always right becomes the customer is more important than my creative integrity, which becomes other people's needs matter more than mine. Lunch breaks are typically skipped entirely, Elena having learned early that her physical needs are secondary to productivity, that self-care is selfish, that suffering for one's art proves dedication. When hunger becomes impossible to ignore, she eats quickly, mechanically, often while working, treating nourishment as another task to be efficiently completed rather than a moment of self-honoring presence. Her afternoon hours are spent on social media marketing, a necessary evil that activates every trigger in her childhood programming. Elena spends hours crafting posts that appear effortlessly confident while actually being calculated to generate maximum approval. She refreshes her feed compulsively, monitoring likes and comments with the intensity of a day trader watching stock prices, each notification triggering a hit of validation that lasts mere moments before anxiety about the next post takes over. Evening. Social interactions follow predictable scripts written in childhood's boardroom of survival strategies. At dinner parties, Elena automatically assumes the role of caretaker, arriving early to help prepare, staying late to clean up, monitoring others' comfort levels with hypervigilant attention while ignoring her own needs completely. She laughs too loudly at jokes she doesn't find funny, agrees with opinions she doesn't share, and minimizes her own experiences to avoid appearing self-centered. When friends share successes, Elena's programmed response is immediate enthusiasm. That masks a darker undercurrent of comparison and inadequacy. Their achievements become evidence of her own failures, their happiness proof of her own deficiency. She congratulates them warmly while internally calculating what she needs to accomplish to catch up, to prove her worth, to earn her place in their circle of apparent ease and success. Her dating patterns reveal perhaps the most painful manifestation of childhood programming. Elena is magnetically drawn to partners who recreate the original dynamic men who are emotionally unavailable, critical, or withholding of approval. She finds herself working overtime to win their affection, accommodating their preferences while abandoning her own, interpreting their disinterest as a challenge to try harder rather than information about their unsuitability as partners. When relationships end, Elena immediately assumes responsibility for the failure. What could she have done differently? How could she have been better? The breakup becomes additional evidence supporting the core wound. She is not enough, has never been enough, will never be enough. She spends weeks analyzing text messages for clues about where she went wrong, treating rejection as confirmation of her deepest fears rather than simple incompatibility. Her evening routine provides no refuge from the day's accumulated triggers. Elena scrolls through dating apps with the same compulsive energy she brings to social media, seeking validation through matches while simultaneously judging herself for needing external approval. She reviews her day with prosecutorial intensity, cataloging mistakes and planning improvements with the fervor of someone whose life depends on perfect performance. Even her preparation for sleep carries the fingerprints of childhood conditioning. Elena sets multiple alarms, convinced that oversleeping would be catastrophic, that being late would confirm others' suspected opinions about her unreliability. She lies in bed replaying conversations, editing her responses to be wittier, more impressive, more worthy of others' continued tolerance. The mechanical precision with which these patterns operate reveals their unconscious nature. Elena experiences them not as choices, but as reality itself, the natural order of things. The price that must be paid for survival in a world that judges her worth based on her ability to be whatever others need her to be. The script that governs. Elena's adult life was not written by her, but for her, inscribed in the neural pathways of a child who was learning how to survive in a family system, where love felt scarce and approval had to be earned through perfect performance. Understanding how this programming originated requires traveling back through time to witness the moments when protective strategies crystallized into unconscious beliefs, when adaptive responses to childhood circumstances became the invisible architecture of adult limitation. Elena was born into a household where her mother, Maria, carried her own unhealed wounds from a childhood of immigrant struggle and father abandonment. Maria's love was genuine but filtered through the lens of her own anxiety about security, success, and social acceptance. Having worked multiple jobs to put herself through nursing school while raising Elena's older sister alone for several years, Maria had developed the belief that love was something earned through achievement, that worth was measured by accomplishment. That rest was a luxury that could be afforded only after perfection was achieved. When Elena was 4, her sister Carmen displayed exceptional academic abilities that became the family's source of pride and hope for upward mobility. Carmen's straight A's earned elaborate celebrations. Her achievements were shared with relatives and neighbors. Her successes became proof that the family was transcending its working-class roots. Elena, 2 years younger and naturally more artistic than academic, began receiving a different kind of attention. The worried concern reserved for the child who might not measure up thought the pivotal moment came during Elena's first grade year, when her report card revealed grades that were good, but not exceptional. 7-year-old Elena sat at the kitchen table while Maria reviewed the paper with the furrowed brow of someone calculating whether this child would be able to secure the kind of future that would justify the sacrifices made on her behalf. Elena, Mia, you're so smart, but you need to try harder. Look at Carmen, she never brings home grades like this. You could do better if you just applied yourself. These words were spoken not from cruelty, but from fear that Elena might struggle as Maria had struggled. Fear that love alone might not be enough to protect her daughter from the world's harshness. Fear that anything less than excellence might mean failure in life's unforgiving competition. But 7-year-old Elena possessed neither the context to understand her mother's motivation nor the cognitive capacity to separate her worth from her performance. In that moment, Elena's developing brain performed the crucial calculation that would shape decades of her life. I am loved conditionally. My worth depends on my achievements. I must be perfect to be valuable. Safety comes through pleasing others. The child who had once danced spontaneously to music playing on the radio began instead to monitor her mother's facial expressions for signs of approval or disappointment, modifying her behavior in real time to maximize positive responses. The pattern reinforced itself through countless micro-interactions. When Elena brought home artwork from school, Maria's response was often distracted acknowledgement followed by suggestions for improvement. When she expressed excitement about a story she'd written, the focus quickly shifted to spelling errors rather than creative expression. When she tried to help with household tasks, the emphasis fell on doing things the right way rather than celebrating her desire to contribute. Elena learned that love felt warmest when she was achieving, coolest when she was simply being. Her nervous system began to associate approval with safety, disapproval with abandonment. The child who had once asked endless questions about everything began to monitor her curiosity, worried that too many questions might be annoying. The little girl who had once worn mismatched clothes with confident joy began to obsess over whether her appearance met some invisible standard of acceptability. Carmen, unaware of her role in this family drama, continued to excel academically, while Elena struggled with the impossible task of being someone she was not. The more Elena tried to match her sister's achievements, the more her natural gifts, creativity, emotional sensitivity, artistic vision were pushed into the background as irrelevant to the narrow definition of success that governed their household. By age 9, Elena had internalized the complete programming that would run her life for the next 3 decades. Her worth was negotiable, dependent on performance. Her needs were secondary to others' expectations. Her authentic self was fundamentally unacceptable. Love was something to be earned rather than received. Safety required constant vigilance and perfect behavior. The tragedy was not that Maria didn't love Elena, she loved her deeply, fiercely, with the complicated intensity of a mother determined to prepare her child for a harsh world. The tragedy was that love filtered through Maria's own unhealed wounds created the very insecurity it was meant to prevent. The protection became the prison. The guidance became the cage. The love became the source of the wound it was meant to heal. Elena's father, Roberto, loving but largely absent due to work demands and cultural conditioning that left emotional labor to women, remained unaware of the psychological drama unfolding between mother and daughters. His rare moments of presence reinforced the pattern: praise for achievements, minimal attention for simply being. Unconscious messages that a girl's value lay in her ability to be accomplished, attractive, and accommodating. The programming took full root when Elena reached adolescence, and her natural developmental changes triggered fresh waves of maternal anxiety. As Elena's body developed and her interests expanded beyond academic subjects, Maria's responses became increasingly focused on control, protection, and preparation for a world that would judge Elena harshly if she didn't meet its standards of acceptable femininity. By the time Elena left for college, the script was complete. Scan environment for signs of approval or disapproval. Adjust behavior to maximize acceptance. Minimize authentic expression to avoid rejection. Repeat endlessly. This program had served its original purpose, keeping Elena safe within her family system, maintaining connection with her mother, avoiding the pain of direct rejection. But what had once been adaptive in childhood's constrained environment would prove devastating in adulthood's broader landscape of possibility. The child who created this survival strategy was wise, creative, and doing her absolute best to maintain love and safety in circumstances beyond her control. The adult who inherited this programming would need tremendous compassion for that child's brilliant adaptation, while simultaneously recognizing that what once protected now imprisons, what once ensured survival now prevents thriving, what once maintained connection now creates the very isolation it was designed to avoid. The first crack in Elena's invisible prison appears on a Tuesday morning in late September, when autumn light streams through her studio windows with unusual intensity, illuminating her latest painting in a way that stops her breath. For just a moment, before the familiar critic awakens, Elena sees her own work through eyes unclouded by comparison or judgment. The watercolor depicts a woman walking alone on the beach, her face turned towards sunrise, and Elena recognizes something in the figure's posture that she has never allowed herself to see: dignity, strength, inherent worth that exists independent of any external validation. The moment lasts perhaps 10 seconds before the programming reasserts itself. Too sentimental, the inner voice declares. Amateur composition. The colors are muddy in the sky. But something has shifted in those 10 seconds of pure seeing, like a tuning fork struck in Elena's chest that continues to vibrate beneath the surface noise of self-criticism. She finds herself returning to the painting throughout the day, stealing glances when the critic is momentarily distracted, trying to recapture that fleeting recognition of her own capacity for beauty. That evening brings an interaction that further destabilizes Elena's familiar patterns. At her friend Sarah's dinner party, Elena automatically assumes her usual role, arriving early with flowers and wine, offering to help in the kitchen, monitoring the group's energy levels to ensure everyone feels included and comfortable. But when Sarah's sister mentions her recent divorce, speaking candidly about the relief of leaving a marriage where she felt constantly criticized and undervalued, Elena feels an unexpected jolt of recognition. I spent 15 years trying to be perfect for someone who was never going to approve of me, Sarah's sister says with startling matter-of-factness. The day I realized I was enough, exactly as I was, that was the day I started living my actual life instead of some performance I thought would earn love. Elena's chest tightens as these words land like arrows finding their mark, activating a resonance so deep it almost makes her dizzy. For the first time in years, Elena finds herself genuinely listening to a conversation rather than monitoring her own performance within it. She notices how Sarah's sister speaks with an ease that Elena recognizes as authentic, not the careful modulation of someone trying to make the right impression, but the natural flow of someone who trusts her right to take up space, to have opinions, to be imperfect and still deserving of love. Later that week, a commission client provides Elena with feedback that would normally send her into spirals of self-doubt and accommodation. The client wants significant changes to a piece Elena considers nearly complete, modifications that would compromise the emotional integrity she fought to capture. Elena's immediate impulse is familiar apologize, agree, work overtime to satisfy, demands regardless of their impact on her artistic vision. But something intervenes. As Elena opens her mouth to offer the usual acquiescence, she finds herself pausing, the words hanging unspoken in the air. In that pause, she notices something remarkable. The client's demands feel unreasonable, not because she is being sensitive or precious about her work, but because they actually are unreasonable. This recognition arrives with the shocking simplicity of obvious truth finally acknowledged. Let me think about these changes and get back to you, Elena hears herself saying, the words emerging from some previously unknown place within her. The client appears slightly surprised but agrees to wait for her response. Elena spends the rest of the day marveling at this micro-rebellion, this tiny assertion of her right to consider what serves her art, rather than automatically prioritizing what serves others' preferences. These small moments of deviation from familiar patterns begin to accumulate like snowflakes, each individually insignificant, but collectively suggesting the possibility of a different kind of weather system. Elena notices herself checking social media less compulsively, feeling less activated by other successes, caring slightly less about whether her posts generate the expected levels of engagement. One evening, while mindlessly scrolling through dating apps, Elena encounters a profile that stops her thumb mid-swipe. The man's photos show him laughing genuinely, engaged in activities he clearly enjoys, looking directly at the camera with eyes that seem comfortable with being seen. His profile description is refreshingly honest about both strengths and areas of growth, written with the kind of self-awareness that suggests someone who knows his worth without needing to prove it constantly. Elena realizes with sudden clarity that she has never been attracted to men who display this kind of authentic confidence. Her dating history is populated entirely by emotionally unavailable partners who kept her guessing, striving, performing for scraps of approval. The recognition feels simultaneously liberating and terrifying. If she doesn't need to earn love through perfect performance, what does she need? Who is she when she's not trying to be someone else? The question hangs in her consciousness like morning mist, present but not yet fully formed, suggesting territories of selfhood she has never explored. Elena finds herself wondering what it would feel like to wake up without immediately scanning for external validation, to move through her day, trusting her own instincts, to create art from authentic expression rather than calculated appeal. These wonderings feel dangerous in their revolutionary implications. If Elena doesn't need to be perfect to be lovable, then who has she been for the past 35 years? If her worth is inherent rather than earned, what happens to the entire architecture of striving that has structured her existence? If authentic expression is not only acceptable but valuable, what aspects of herself has she been suppressing in service of others' comfort? The questions multiply faster than answers, creating a productive discomfort that signals the beginning of significant transformation. Elena stands at the threshold between unconscious patterns and conscious choice, between inherited programming and authentic living, between the familiar prison of limitation and the unknown territory of freedom. Something ancient within her recognizes this moment as pivotal, pregnant with possibility, alive with the potential for liberation that has been quietly growing beneath years of accommodation and self-abandonment. The collision between who she has been and who she might become creates the exact conditions necessary for profound change, enough safety to risk transformation, enough discomfort to motivate movement, enough self-compassion to navigate the journey ahead with love rather than criticism. Elena's transformation begins not with dramatic revelation, but with the quiet arrival of an unexpected mentor, appearing in her life with the gentle inevitability of dawn breaking over familiar landscape. Margaret Chun, a retired art professor whose own paintings grace museums worldwide, enters Elena's world through the simple act of purchasing a small watercolor from the local gallery, where Elena's work is displayed. Margaret, 73 years old, with silver hair that catches light like spun moonbeams and eyes that hold the deep clarity of someone who has made peace with themselves, appears at Elena's studio on a Thursday afternoon carrying the purchased painting and wearing the kind of smile that suggests secrets worth knowing. Her presence fills the space with an unusual quality of attention, not the scattered, anxious awareness Elena typically encounters, but something focused, grounded, radiating the calm confidence of someone who has found their way home to themselves. "I bought this piece because it spoke to something in me," Margaret says, unwrapping the watercolor that depicts children playing on the beach, while adults watch from a distance. But I came here because I suspect you don't yet know what you spoke. Her voice carries the slight accent of someone who learned English as a second language, but has spoken it with precision for decades. Each word chosen carefully, landing with the weight of considered thought. Elena feels simultaneously exposed and intrigued by this stranger's directness. Margaret moves through the studio with the easy authority of someone comfortable with creative spaces, pausing before various paintings with an attention that feels different from typical gallery visitors. She doesn't offer immediate praise or criticism, but instead seems to be listening to each piece, receiving whatever story it wants to tell. "You paint from a deep place," Margaret observes, standing before Elena's latest seascape. "But there's a holding back, yes? Like someone beautiful who keeps apologizing for taking up space." Elena's breath catches at the accuracy of this assessment. The way this stranger is seen through her work to something she has never consciously acknowledged. Margaret turns to face Elena with the kind of direct gaze that sees past social masks to essential truth. "I spent 40 years teaching young artists, and I learned to recognize the ones who were painting from their wounds rather than their gifts. The work is technically skilled, emotionally evocative, but there's contraction, a pulling back from full expression, like holding your breath while singing." The metaphor lands with shocking precision. Elena realizes she's been holding her breath her entire life, constraining her authentic expression to fit within the narrow parameters of acceptability established in childhood. The recognition brings unexpected tears, not of sadness, but of relief at being so accurately witnessed by another human being. "I don't usually do this," Margaret continues. Settling into the worn armchair Elena keeps for the rare visitors who linger beyond polite viewing. "But something about your work reminds me of my own journey 50 years ago, when I was painting pretty pictures to please others instead of true pictures to please my soul." She pauses, studying Elena with eyes that seem to see decades into the past and future simultaneously. "Would you be open to some unconventional mentoring? Not about technique, you have plenty of skill. About permission. About painting from the place that knows your worth rather than the place that questions it." Elena finds herself nodding before her mind can construct the usual defenses, the automatic responses designed to deflect real intimacy. Something in Margaret's presence bypasses her normal filtering system, creating space for authentic response rather than calculated performance. "I'm not sure I know how to do that," Elena admits, the honesty surprising her with its simplicity. Margaret's laugh carries the warmth of someone who remembers her own confusion during transformation. "Of course you don't know how you've been trained not to know how. The entire culture conspires to keep us painting from our wounds, creating from our insecurities, expressing from our need for approval rather than our connection to truth." She gestures toward Elena's paintings with a hand marked by decades of creative work. "But the capacity is there, waiting. I can see it in your brushstrokes when you forget to be careful." Over the following weeks, Margaret becomes a regular presence in Elena's studio, arriving with the reliability of tides, but never announcing her visits in advance. Her teaching method defies every expectation Elena has about instruction, focusing not on what to paint, but on who is doing the painting. Instead of critiquing technique, Margaret asks questions that probe the emotional terrain beneath Elena's creative choices. "What were you feeling when you chose that particular shade of blue?" she might ask, or "What part of you decided the horizon needed to be perfectly straight?" Or, "Who taught you that shadows should be apologetic rather than dramatic?" Each question lands like a gentle excavation tool, revealing layers of conditioning Elena never knew existed. Margaret introduces Elena to exercises that feel more like therapy than art instruction. She suggests painting with her non-dominant hand to bypass perfectionist conditioning, creating work in 5-minute bursts to prevent overthinking, using colors that feel wrong, to explore beyond comfortable limitations. Each experiment reveals how deeply Elena's creative expression has been shaped by the 7-year-old's strategies for earning approval. Your authentic voice is not lost, Margaret explains during one particularly revealing session where Elena has painted an abstract explosion of color that makes her simultaneously proud and embarrassed. It's buried under layers of learned behavior, like discovering a beautiful old floor beneath decades of carpet. We're not creating something new, we're uncovering what was always there. The breakthrough moment arrives unexpectedly during what begins as an ordinary afternoon of painting together in comfortable silence. Elena is working on a commission piece, a traditional landscape, requested by a client who specifically asked for something peaceful and pretty. When Margaret quietly places a blank canvas beside her and suggests she paint whatever wants to emerge, while continuing the commissioned work, Elena finds herself splitting her attention between the careful, controlled brushstrokes required for the client's expectations and the spontaneous, intuitive marks appearing on the second canvas. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore, one painting tight, predictable, technically competent but emotionally flat. The other, loose, alive, crackling with energy and authentic feeling despite its apparent mistakes. Which one feels like you? Margaret asks gently, watching Elena stare at the two canvases with growing recognition. Elena's answer emerges as whisper, "I don't know who I am." Margaret nods with the satisfaction of someone who has guided another to precisely this recognition. Perfect. That's the beginning of everything. The willingness to not know who you are is the doorway to discovering who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. This admission, "I don't know who I am," creates a strange sense of liberation in Elena's chest, like a held breath finally released. She realizes she has spent decades trying to be a person she constructed to meet others' expectations. A carefully crafted identity designed for maximum acceptability rather than authentic expression. The prospect of discovering her actual self, beneath all the learned adaptations, feels both terrifying and thrilling. Margaret becomes not just a teacher, but a living example of what Elena is learning to become: someone who moves through the world with unshakable self-possession, who creates from authentic inspiration rather than external pressure, who relates to others from fullness rather than need. In Margaret's presence, Elena begins to remember fragments of her childhood self, the little girl who danced without music, who painted pictures of purple trees and blue horses, who believed her imagination was a gift rather than something to be corrected. The child you were before you learned to be someone else. Margaret says during one of their sessions, she's still there. Every authentic choice you make, every moment you choose truth over approval, you strengthen her voice. Eventually, she becomes louder than the conditioning. Eventually, she becomes you again. Elena starts to understand that healing is not about becoming someone new, but about returning to someone she has always been, beneath the layers of adaptive strategies and protective patterns. Margaret's mentorship offers not instructions for transformation, but permission to remember. Not techniques for improvement, but recognition of inherent worth. Not criticism of who she has been, but celebration of who she's becoming. The first experiment Margaret suggests seems deceptively simple. For 1 week, Elena is to paint only what genuinely excites her, ignoring completely what might sell, impress, or meet others' expectations. Paint like you're the only person who will ever see the work, Margaret instructs. Paint for an audience of one you. Elena approaches this assignment with the same anxious perfectionism she brings to everything, initially missing the point entirely. Her first attempts remain carefully controlled, technically proficient, but emotionally guarded. She paints acceptable subjects in acceptable ways, her authentic excitement filtered through decades of conditioning about what constitutes good art. The results are competent but lifeless, like photographs of meals rather than the nourishing food itself. Margaret reviews these first efforts with gentle amusement. "You're still painting for the imaginary committee of approval," she observes. "What would happen if you fired the committee? What would you paint if there were no rules about what art should look like, should accomplish, should mean?" This question haunts Elena for days. She realizes she has never created anything without simultaneously imagining its reception, its judgment, its worth in others' eyes. The idea of painting purely for her own joy feels simultaneously revolutionary and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff without knowing whether she will fall or fly. The breakthrough comes during a frustrating afternoon when Elena finds herself staring at a blank canvas, paralyzed by the impossibility of pleasing herself without reference to external standards. In desperation, she closes her eyes and allows her hand to move across the canvas without conscious direction, letting color and texture emerge from some deeper place than critical thinking. When she opens her eyes, Elena discovers she has created something that makes her gasp with recognition. The painting depicts a woman dancing alone in a field of sunflowers, her face turned toward sky, her body expressing pure joy and movement. The technique is loose, imperfect by academic standards, but the energy radiating from the canvas is undeniable. For the first time in decades, Elena has created something that feels completely, authentically hers. The experience of viewing her own authentic expression triggers an unexpected emotional response. Elena finds herself crying not tears of sadness, but something more complex, a grief for all the years she has suppressed this voice, a relief at its emergence, a joy at recognizing her own creative spirit after so long in exile. Margaret finds her standing before the painting, tears streaming down her face, and simply nods with understanding. "Now you know the difference," Margaret says quietly, "between creating from conditioning and creating from truth. The feeling in your body right now, remember it. This your compass." Encouraged by this breakthrough, Elena begins experimenting with other forms of authentic expression. She starts a series of paintings depicting women in moments of genuine emotion, laughing, crying, raging, dreaming, rather than the carefully composed, emotionally neutral figures she has typically created. Each piece challenges her conditioning about what is acceptable to reveal, what emotions are appropriate to express, what aspects of human experience deserve artistic attention. The process of painting authentic emotion forces Elena to connect with her own emotional landscape in ways she has avoided for years. To paint genuine joy, she must remember what authentic happiness feels like beneath the performance of contentment. To capture real sorrow, she must access her own grief rather than painting generic sadness. To depict honest anger, she must acknowledge the rage she has been suppressing behind decades of people-pleasing accommodation. These explorations spill beyond her art into daily life. Elena finds herself noticing her authentic responses to situations rather than automatically generating the appropriate reaction. When a friend cancels plans at the last minute, Elena allows herself to feel disappointed rather than immediately offering understanding. When her mother calls with familiar criticism disguised as concern, Elena notices her anger rather than suppressing it in service of family harmony. Margaret introduces another experiment. Elena is to spend 1 hour each day doing exactly what she wants to do, without consideration for productivity, achievement, or others' needs. This assignment proves more challenging than any artistic technique Elena has ever attempted. She realizes she has no idea what she actually wants to do. When freed from the constant calculation of what she should do, the first attempts at pure desire following feel awkward, foreign, like learning to write with her non-dominant hand. Elena finds herself drawn to activities she hasn't engaged in for years, taking long walks without destination, reading poetry for pleasure rather than cultural improvement, listening to music that moves her body rather than impresses others. With her sophisticated taste, each act of authentic choosing strengthens her capacity to recognize genuine desire beneath learned preference. A pivotal moment arrives when Elena realizes she wants to sing. The desire emerges suddenly while she's painting, a longing so pure and unexpected it stops her breath. She cannot remember the last time she sang for pleasure, the childhood joy of vocal expression, having been edited out of her life somewhere between adolescence and adulthood. The impulse feels both deeply natural and completely foreign, like remembering how to use a limb that has been numb for decades. Elena's first attempts at singing trigger waves of self-consciousness that nearly overwhelm the impulse. Her voice sounds rusty, unpracticed, far from the polished performances she imagines others expect. But gradually, as she allows herself to sing in her studio while painting, something ancient awakens, a connection to her own body, her own breath, her own capacity for spontaneous expression that bypasses the critical mind entirely. Margaret witnesses one of these singing sessions and responds with the kind of smile that contains multitudes. "There she is," she says simply. "The woman you were before you learned to hide her." These experiments in authentic expression begin to ripple outward into Elena's relationships. She notices herself becoming less available for others' emotional dramas, less willing to sacrifice her own needs for their comfort, less invested in maintaining harmony at any cost. Some friends respond positively to her increased authenticity, while others seem uncomfortable with her growing self-possession, revealing the conditional nature of connections built on her endless accommodation. The most significant shift occurs in Elena's relationship with solitude. Previously, being alone felt like evidence of her inadequacy, proof that she had failed to create the connections she desperately craved. But as Elena learns to appreciate her own company, to find fulfillment in her own thoughts and creative expression, solitude transforms from punishment to sanctuary, from evidence of failure to space for authentic communion with herself. This growing comfort with her own presence creates an unexpected side effect. Other people become more drawn to her energy. Elena notices conversations becoming more engaging, creative collaborations emerging organically, romantic prospects appearing who seem genuinely interested in who she is rather than what she can provide. The authenticity she feared would lead to rejection actually creates the conditions for deeper, more satisfying connections. Margaret observes these changes with the satisfaction of a gardener watching carefully tended plants finally bloom. "When you stop trying to be someone else," she tells Elena, "you become irresistibly yourself. The energy you've been using to maintain false identity becomes available for authentic expression. People feel that energy, it's magnetic in ways that performance never is." The transformation that has been building through weeks of experimentation crystallizes into breakthrough during what begins as an ordinary painting session, but becomes Elena's liberation from decades of unconscious limitation. Margaret has suggested Elena attempt something she has never tried before, a large-scale self-portrait painted not from a mirror, but from her inner sense of who she truly is beneath all social conditioning. Elena approaches the blank canvas with familiar trepidation, but as she begins to mix colors, something unexpected happens. Instead of the usual anxious calculation about how to present herself acceptably, Elena finds herself genuinely curious about what wants to emerge. She begins painting with unusual freedom, allowing her hand to move intuitively rather than following a predetermined plan. The woman who appears on the canvas bears little resemblance to the carefully constructed identity Elena has presented to the world for decades. This painted woman looks directly at the viewer with eyes that hold both vulnerability and strength, her expression neither pleasing nor defensive, but simply present. Her hair flows untamed, her shoulders are relaxed, her mouth curves in a slight smile that suggests secrets worth knowing rather than approval, desperately sought. As Elena works, something unprecedented occurs. She completely loses track of time, entering a state of creative flow where consciousness merges with expression, where the boundary between artist and art dissolves into pure creative force. Hours pass like minutes, the outside world recedes into irrelevance, and Elena experiences the profound satisfaction of authentic creation, unfiltered by self-consciousness or external consideration. When Margaret arrives for their scheduled session, she finds Elena standing before the completed portrait in a state of something approaching shock. The painting radiates an energy that neither woman can ignore, not the careful beauty Elena typically creates, but something rawer, more alive, crackling with the undeniable presence of truth authentically expressed. "My God," Elena whispers, staring at her own work as if seeing it for the first time. Is this ... is this how I actually look? Margaret studies both Elena and her painted reflection with the deep attention of someone witnessing a profound moment of recognition. "It's how you look when you're not trying to look like someone else," she confirms. "It's your face wearing your own expression instead of the one you think others want to see." The breakthrough extends beyond artistic achievement into fundamental identity revision. Looking at this portrait, Elena recognizes someone she has glimpsed only in fragments, the woman who emerges when she sings while painting, who chooses authentic desire over appropriate action, who values her own creative vision over others' approval. This is not an idealized version of herself, but simply herself, unedited, unperformed, unafraid. The recognition triggers what can only be described as a remembering, not of specific events, but of a way of being that feels both completely foreign and absolutely familiar. Elena realizes she is looking at the person she has always been beneath. The layers of adaptive conditioning, the self that existed before she learned to monitor others' responses and modify her behavior accordingly. "I can't go back," Elena says suddenly, the words emerging from depths she didn't know existed. "I can't pretend I don't know this woman now that I've seen her." The statement carries the weight of inevitability, the recognition that some transformations create irreversible shifts in consciousness that make previous ways of being impossible to maintain. Margaret nods with the satisfaction of someone who has witnessed countless such moments of liberation. "This is what I call the point of no return, not because you can't choose unconsciousness again, but because consciousness, once experienced, makes unconsciousness feel like suffocation. You've tasted freedom. Everything else will feel like prison now." The days following this breakthrough are marked by a series of cascading realizations, as Elena begins to see all aspects of her life through the lens of her newly recognized authentic self. Her carefully decorated cottage suddenly feels like a museum of someone else's taste, rather than a home that reflects her genuine preferences. Her wardrobe appears to belong to a character she has been playing rather than clothes chosen for their personal appeal. Even her social media presence strikes her as an elaborate performance of someone she barely recognizes. Most significantly, Elena's relationship patterns become transparent in their dysfunction. She sees with crystalline clarity how she has been, unconsciously recreating her childhood's conditional love dynamic in every romantic relationship. How she has attracted partners who required her to abandon herself in exchange for their acceptance. How she has mistaken intensity for intimacy and anxiety for love. This recognition initially brings grief mourning for all the years spent in service of others' approval, all the authentic expressions suppressed, all the genuine connections missed while performing acceptability. But beneath the grief flows something stronger, relief at finally understanding, excitement about possibilities, gratitude for the mentor who helped her remember who she had always been. Elena's breakthrough impacts her art immediately and dramatically. The paintings she creates in the weeks following her self-portrait session carry an energy that surprises everyone, including herself. Gallery visitors linger longer before her work, asking questions that suggest deeper engagement. Other artists begin seeking her perspective, drawn to something they sense but cannot name. Collectors who have never shown interest in her previous work suddenly inquire about purchasing pieces. The transformation extends into her daily interactions with a naturalness that suggests she has simply returned to her original state rather than become someone new. Elena finds herself expressing opinions she actually holds rather than ones calculated to maintain harmony. She offers help when genuinely moved to do so rather than from compulsive people-pleasing. She pursues activities that bring authentic joy rather than those that project an impressive image. Perhaps most remarkably, Elena discovers that being authentically herself requires less energy than the constant performance she has maintained for decades. The exhausting work of monitoring others' responses, modifying her behavior for maximum acceptance, and suppressing authentic expression in favor of appropriate presentation simply ceases to feel necessary. She realizes she has been trying to solve the wrong problem. Instead of learning to be lovable, she needed to remember that she already was. Margaret observes these changes with the quiet pride of someone who has facilitated rather than created. Transformation. The butterfly doesn't become the butterfly, she tells Elena during one of their final formal sessions. The butterfly was always the butterfly, just temporarily organized as a caterpillar. You haven't changed into someone else. You've simply stopped being organized as someone you never were. This breakthrough moment marks not an ending but a beginning, the commencement of a life lived from authentic center rather than adaptive. Periphery. The dawn of relationships based on genuine connection rather than strategic performance. The birth of creative expression that serves truth rather than approval. Elena understands that while the moment of recognition was sudden, the integration of this recognition into every aspect of her existence will be the work of a lifetime work that feels not like burden but like coming home to herself after decades of exile. Elena's transformation from unconscious performance to authentic living requires the practical work of reconstructing her entire reality around this new understanding of her worth and identity. Like an architect redesigning a building from the foundation up, she must examine every aspect of her life through the lens of her breakthrough recognition, determining what serves her authentic self and what merely serves the character she had been unconsciously playing. The process begins with her physical environment, which suddenly feels like a museum of someone else's choices rather than a home that reflects genuine preferences. Elena walks through her cottage with fresh eyes, noticing how every decorative choice has been made with an invisible audience in mind. The cream-colored sofa that shows every stain but photographs beautifully. The coffee table books chosen for their cultural impressiveness rather than reading pleasure. The artwork carefully selected to demonstrate sophisticated taste rather than personal resonance. Room by room, Elena begins the gentle revolution of authentic preference over appropriate choice. She replaces the pristine cream sofa with a deep blue sectional that invites curling up with books and art supplies. The intimidating coffee table books give way to poetry collections, sketch pads, and novels chosen purely for their ability to transport her imagination. Her sterile bedroom transforms as she adds plants, candles, and textiles in colors that make her feel alive, rather than colors that match the design magazines she had unconsciously been trying to emulate. This physical reconstruction parallels an internal renovation as Elena learns to distinguish between authentic desire and inherited should. The exercise proves more challenging than anticipated. Decades of conditioning have made her automatic responses feel like genuine preferences, requiring patient excavation to uncover what actually appeals to her versus what she believes should appeal to someone like her. Elena discovers preferences she never knew she had. A love of bold colors that had been suppressed in favor of sophisticated neutrals. An attraction to organic shapes rather than the geometric precision she had thought was more refined. A desire for spaces that feel lived in rather than museum perfect. Each authentic choice reinforces her growing connection to the woman she is becoming, creating an environment that supports rather than constrains her expanding self-expression. Her daily routines undergo similar revision as Elena learns to structure her time around genuine energy patterns rather than external expectations. The 5:30 a.m. alarm clock, maintained for years as proof of virtue, gives way to a natural, waking rhythm that honors her body's actual needs. She discovers she is naturally most creative in late morning light, most social in afternoon hours, most contemplative in evening silence, organizing her schedule around these authentic rhythms rather than forcing herself into artificial patterns. Designed to impress rather than serve, Elena's relationship with food transforms as she learns to eat from hunger and pleasure, rather than rules and restrictions. Years of unconscious food policing, avoiding certain cuisines that seemed too indulgent, ordering salads when she wanted pasta, restricting portions to maintain an acceptable appearance, give way to intuitive eating that honors both nourishment and enjoyment. The simple act of ordering what she actually wants in restaurants becomes a radical act of self-respect. Her creative practice evolves dramatically as Elena learns to paint from inspiration rather than calculation. The careful analysis of market trends and gallery preferences that once guided her artistic choices becomes irrelevant as she discovers the deep satisfaction of creating work that emerges from authentic vision. Her paintings begin to carry an energy that surprises even her, not the polished beauty designed for broad appeal, but something more raw and alive, more specifically hers. Elena's professional relationships shift as she learns to value her work appropriately rather than undercharging from unconscious unworthiness. Raising her prices initially triggers every anxiety about deserving compensation. But Margaret's gentle guidance helps her recognize that undervaluing her art perpetuates the very patterns she's working to heal. When clients accept her new pricing without hesitation, some even expressing surprise that she hadn't charged more previously, Elena realizes she has been solving problems that didn't exist while creating ones that did. The reconstruction extends to her social media presence, which Elena recognizes as perhaps the most elaborate performance of all. The carefully curated feed designed to project success, happiness, and artistic sophistication gives way to authentic sharing that includes both struggles and victories. Works in progress alongside finished pieces, moments of ordinary life, rather than only the highlights designed to generate envy and admiration. This shift toward authenticity on social platforms produces unexpected results. Elena's engagement increases rather than decreases as people respond to the recognizable humanity in her posts. Other artists begin reaching out to share their own struggles with authenticity and performance, creating connections based on genuine resonance rather than mutual impression management. Elena's exercise routine transforms from punishment, disguised as self-care, into movement that genuinely serves her well-being. The grueling gym sessions designed to achieve an acceptable body shape give way to walks along the coastline, dance sessions in her studio, and yoga practices that honor her body's wisdom rather than forcing it into submission. She discovers that moving from joy rather than obligation actually produces better physical results while requiring less willpower to maintain. Perhaps most significantly, Elena's approach to making decisions shifts from external consultation to internal guidance. Previously, every choice from what to wear to which projects to accept involved elaborate mental polling of imaginary advisors, wondering what others would think, what the right choice might be according to invisible authorities. Now, Elena learns to pause, breathe, and simply ask herself what feels most aligned with her authentic truth in each moment. This internal guidance system proves remarkably reliable once Elena learns to trust it. Decisions that once required hours of anxious deliberation become clear through simple present moment awareness. Opportunities that look impressive but feel wrong become easy to decline. Projects that excite her authentic vision become easy to accept, regardless of their impact on her carefully constructed image. Elena discovers that living authentically requires saying no more often than she ever imagined, but that each authentic no creates space for more meaningful yes responses. Declining social obligations that feel obligatory rather than genuinely appealing opens calendar space for activities that nourish her spirit. Refusing projects that compromise her artistic vision creates room for work that truly expresses her unique perspective. The most profound aspect of Elena's reality reconstruction involves learning to be alone without immediately filling the space with productivity or entertainment. Previously, solitude triggered anxiety about wasted time, missed opportunities, or evidence of social inadequacy. Now Elena discovers that unstructured time alone becomes a sanctuary where authentic insights emerge, where creative inspiration flows naturally, where the constant noise of external demands quiets enough for her inner wisdom to be heard. This growing comfort with solitude paradoxically makes Elena more appealing to others. Friends begin commenting on a new quality in her presence, something grounded, centered, genuinely engaged rather than performing engagement. Romantic prospects appear who seem drawn to her authentic energy rather than her ability to accommodate their needs. Elena realizes she is discovering the truth Margaret had shared. Authenticity is magnetic in ways that performance never can be. The integration of Elena's breakthrough recognition requires not just external changes, but the development of entirely new internal capacities, ways of thinking, feeling, and responding that support her authentic self rather than the adaptive patterns that once governed her existence. Like learning a new language, this process demands patience, practice, and willingness to feel awkward during the acquisition of unfamiliar skills. Elena's internal dialogue undergoes perhaps the most dramatic transformation as she learns to replace the harsh, critical voice inherited from childhood with something approaching self-compassion. The process begins with simple awareness, noticing when the old programming activates, recognizing the familiar tone of self-attack, observing how quickly criticism arises in response to any perceived mistake or imperfection. Margaret introduces Elena to the practice of internal dialogue revision, suggesting she imagines speaking to herself the way she would address a beloved friend facing similar challenges. This exercise initially feels forced, artificial, like speaking a foreign language with a thick accent. But gradually, Elena develops fluency in self-kindness, learning to offer herself the same patience and understanding she naturally extends to others. The transformation of her inner voice creates ripple effects throughout Elena's emotional landscape. Mistakes that once triggered spirals of self-condemnation become opportunities for learning and growth. Criticisms from others lose their devastating power as Elena develops the internal security that comes from self-acceptance rather than external validation. The constant background anxiety of not being enough begins to dissolve as she cultivates an inner environment of basic safety and belonging. Elena learns to regulate her emotional responses through presence rather than suppression. Previously, uncomfortable feelings were immediately pushed away, numbed through busyness, or transformed into more acceptable emotions through mental gymnastics. Now she develops the capacity to simply be with whatever arises: anger, sadness, fear, joy, without immediately to fix, change, or justify the experience. This emotional regulation mastery emerges through practice with increasingly challenging situations. When her mother delivers familiar criticisms during their weekly phone call, Elena notices the old pattern of immediate defense and accommodation wanting to activate. But instead of automatically responding from the wounded child, she pauses, breathes, and chooses to respond from her adult self, acknowledging her mother's concerns without absorbing them as truth about her worth. The development of healthy boundaries becomes one of Elena's most crucial new capacities. Having spent decades with porous boundaries that allowed others' emotions, expectations, and demands to flood her system, Elena must learn to distinguish between where she ends and others begin. This boundary development involves both external actions, saying no to unreasonable requests, limiting contact with draining relationships, and internal practices that maintain her emotional sovereignty. Elena discovers that boundaries are not walls built against others, but clarity about her own limits, preferences, and responsibilities. She learns to say, "That doesn't work for me," without elaborate justification or apology. She develops the ability to care about others' well-being without automatically making it her responsibility to ensure their happiness. She cultivates compassion for their struggles without absorbing their pain as her own burden. Perhaps most significantly, Elena learns to set boundaries with her own internal patterns, the tendency to overthink, the compulsion to seek external validation, the habit of comparing herself to others. She develops what Margaret calls internal boundaries, the ability to notice unhelpful mental patterns without being swept away by them, to observe her thoughts without believing everyone deserves serious consideration. The cultivation of self-compassion becomes Elena's most transformative practice. Having lived for decades in relationship with an internal critic that judged every action harshly, she must consciously develop the capacity for inner kindness. This involves learning to speak to herself during difficult moments the way a loving friend might, with understanding, encouragement, and recognition of her inherent worth regardless of performance. Elena's self-compassion practice includes 3 elements. Margaret teaches her mindful awareness of her suffering without immediately trying to fix it, recognition that struggle is part of the human experience rather than evidence of personal failure, and offering herself the same kindness she would naturally extend to someone she loves facing similar challenges. This self-compassion cultivation proves especially crucial during setbacks, when old patterns temporarily reassert themselves, or when Elena's growth feels too slow or incomplete. Instead of using these moments as evidence of failure, she learns to see them as natural parts of the healing process, opportunities to practice self-forgiveness and renewed commitment to authentic living. Elena develops the capacity for what Margaret calls wise discernment, the ability to distinguish between her authentic inner guidance and the noise of conditioning, fear, or external pressure. This skill requires learning to recognize the different qualities of various internal voices, the anxious urgency of fear-based thinking versus the calm clarity of authentic knowing, the demanding tone of internalized expectations versus the gentle invitation of genuine desire. Through practice, Elena learns to identify her authentic inner wisdom by its qualities. It feels spacious rather than constricted, patient rather than urgent, loving rather than critical, clear rather than confused. When making decisions, she learns to pause and ask not, "What should I do?" but "What feels most aligned with my truth in this moment?" The development of emotional intelligence becomes crucial as Elena learns to navigate relationships from authenticity rather than adaptation. She develops the capacity to recognize and name her emotions as they arise, to communicate her needs clearly without aggression or manipulation, to respond to others' emotions with empathy rather than automatic accommodation. Elena learns the difference between empathy and emotional absorption, feeling with others rather than feeling for them, caring about their well-being without making their emotional state her responsibility. This emotional intelligence allows her to maintain connection, while preserving her own emotional integrity to be supportive without being depleted. Her relationship with failure transforms completely as Elena learns to see mistakes as information rather than evidence of inadequacy. Each error becomes data about what doesn't work rather than proof that she doesn't work. This reframe allows her to take creative risks, to attempt challenging projects, to grow through experimentation rather than paralysis. Elena's capacity for presence expands as she learns to inhabit her own experience fully rather than constantly monitoring others' responses to her. She develops the ability to be genuinely here, in this moment, with whatever is arising, rather than mentally rehearsing future conversations or reviewing past interactions for evidence of success or failure. This presence capacity enhances every aspect of Elena's life. Her art becomes more alive because she is fully engaged with the creative process rather than simultaneously imagining how the work will be received. Her relationships deepen because she is actually listening to others, rather than planning her response or monitoring their approval. Her daily experiences become richer because she is inhabiting them, rather than performing them. Alana's transformation from unconscious performance to authentic living creates expanding circles of influence that touch every relationship and community connection in her life. Like a stone dropped into still water, her growing self-possession generates waves of change that extend far beyond her personal experience, inviting others into their own possibilities for greater authenticity and freedom. The first ripples appear in Elena's closest relationships, where her increased self-awareness and boundary setting initially creates some discomfort among friends accustomed to her endless accommodation. Sarah, Elena's longest friendship, goes through a period of adjustment as Elena becomes less available for middle-of-the-night crisis calls and elaborate last-minute favors. Instead of immediately agreeing to every request, Elena begins asking for time to consider whether she can genuinely help without depleting herself. This shift initially triggers Sarah's own unconscious patterns around friendship, her assumption that love must be proven through constant availability, her fear that boundaries mean rejection, her own conditioning about earning care through neediness. But as Elena maintains loving consistency while holding healthy limits, Sarah begins to experience something she has never encountered in friendship: the safety of being in relationship with someone who takes responsibility for their own well-being, rather than expecting others to manage their emotional state. Gradually, Sarah finds herself inspired by Elena's transformation, beginning to examine her own patterns of people-pleasing and self-abandonment. Their friendship deepens as it becomes based on mutual respect and genuine choice, rather than obligation and unconscious enabling. Sarah starts setting her own boundaries, taking better care of herself, and relating from authenticity rather than neediness. Elena's art community experiences similar ripples as her authentic creative expression gives other artists permission to explore beyond conventional expectations. At gallery openings and studio visits, other artists begin sharing their own struggles with creating for market appeal versus authentic vision. Elena's willingness to discuss the psychological aspects of creative blocks and artistic authenticity opens conversations previously considered too personal for professional settings. A younger artist, Marina, approaches Elena after viewing her latest exhibition, sharing her own struggles with perfectionism and fear of creative risk-taking. Elena finds herself naturally offering the kind of mentorship Margaret had provided, not through formal instruction, but through modeling the possibility of creating from authentic inspiration rather than external pressure. Marina begins experimenting with more expressive techniques, and her work develops a vitality that attracts positive attention from collectors and critics alike. The gallery owner, who represents Elena's work, notices the shift in both her art and her professional presence. Elena's increased confidence in pricing her work appropriately and discussing her artistic vision clearly transforms their business relationship. Instead of accepting whatever terms are offered, Elena begins advocating for her interests while maintaining collaborative spirit. This modeling influences the gallery's approach with other artists, creating more equitable relationships that honor artistic value. Elena's family relationships undergo the most complex transformations as her growing authenticity challenges long-standing dynamics. Her weekly phone calls with her mother begin including more honest communication as Elena learns to express her perspective rather than simply absorbing criticism and offering appeasement. When her mother delivers familiar critiques about Elena's lifestyle choices, Elena responds with something unprecedented. "I understand you're concerned, Mom, but I'm making choices that feel right for my life." This response initially increases tension as her mother struggles with Elena's departure from the familiar role of the accommodating daughter who validates parental opinions through compliance. But gradually, as Elena maintains loving connection while refusing to return to unconscious patterns, their relationship develops a depth it never possessed when based on Elena's performance of being the daughter her mother thought she wanted. Elena's sister Carmen, long accustomed to being the family's success story, initially feels threatened by Elena's growing confidence and artistic recognition. But as Elena's transformation continues, Carmen begins examining her own life, recognizing how she has built her identity around being the good daughter and questioning whether her carefully constructed success actually brings fulfillment. The sisters begin having conversations about their childhood, experiences that reveal shared struggles they had never previously acknowledged. Elena's romantic life transforms dramatically as her new self-possession attracts entirely different types of partners. Men who had previously shown no interest, those comfortable with emotionally available women rather than needing to be needed, begin approaching her with genuine curiosity about her thoughts, feelings, and creative work. Elena finds herself naturally attracted to partners who offer security and consistency rather than the emotional unavailability that once felt familiar and exciting. When Elena enters her first healthy romantic relationship, the contrast with previous partnerships becomes startlingly clear. David, a carpenter who builds custom furniture with the same attention to authentic beauty Elena has learned to bring to her paintings, appreciates her exactly as she is rather than as potential material for improvement. Their relationship develops naturally through shared interests and genuine compatibility rather than Elena's familiar pattern of accommodating herself into someone else's preferences. David's consistent kindness and respect for Elena's boundaries initially confuses her nervous system, which had been trained to interpret inconsistent treatment as love and stability as boredom. But gradually, Elena learns to receive care without immediately calculating how to earn it, to express her needs without fear of abandonment, to contribute to the relationship from fullness rather than desperate need for approval. Their partnership becomes a model for other couples in their community as Elena and David demonstrate the possibility of intimacy based on mutual respect rather than complementary dysfunction. Friends begin asking about their relationship dynamics, curious about how they navigate disagreements without drama, how they maintain individual identity within partnership, how they support each other's growth rather than requiring each other to remain static for the sake of security. Elena's transformation creates ripples throughout her wider community as her art studio becomes an informal gathering place for others exploring authentic self-expression. What begins as Margaret's occasional visits evolves into regular sessions where local artists, writers, and other creative individuals come together to explore the intersection of personal growth and artistic authenticity. These gatherings develop organically into something resembling group therapy, disguised as artistic collaboration. Participants share their struggles with perfectionism, their fears about creative risk-taking, their challenges in maintaining authentic expression within commercial pressures. Elena finds herself naturally facilitating these conversations, offering the same patient witness and gentle guidance that Margaret had provided during her own transformation. The impact extends into the broader community as Elena becomes known, not just for her art, but for her willingness to discuss the emotional and psychological aspects of creative work. She begins receiving invitations to speak at art schools and community centers about the relationship between healing and creativity, sharing her journey from performance-based to authentic artistic expression. Elena's local coffee shop, where she often works on smaller pieces, becomes a different kind of space as she models authentic presence in daily interactions. Instead of the anxious people-pleasing that once characterized her public behavior, Elena relates to baristas, fellow customers, and casual acquaintances with genuine warmth that expects nothing in return. Her natural presence creates permission for others to drop their own social performances, leading to more authentic connections and a general atmosphere of greater ease and acceptance. The elementary school, where Elena occasionally teaches art workshops, experiences transformation as she brings her understanding of authentic expression to work with children. Instead of focusing on technical skill or conventional ideas of artistic success, Elena creates space for children to explore their genuine creative impulses, to express emotions through color and form, to value process over product. Parents notice changes in their children after Elena's workshops, increased confidence in self-expression, less concern with making perfect art, greater willingness to experiment and take creative risks. Some parents begin questioning their own relationships with perfectionism and performance, recognizing how their well-intentioned guidance might inadvertently suppress their children's authentic expression. Elena's influence on the local art scene grows as gallery visitors increasingly seek work that carries the quality they recognize in Elena's paintings: authenticity, emotional honesty, technical skill in service of expression rather than mere demonstration of ability. Other artists begin experimenting with more personal subject matter, less concerned with market trends and more interested in authentic vision. The transformation creates a network of individuals committed to authentic living who support each other's continued growth. They meet informally for meals, walks along the coast, and creative collaborations that prioritize genuine connection over networking for professional advancement. This community becomes a living example of relationships based on authenticity rather than mutual performance, demonstrating the possibility of belonging without sacrificing individual truth. Elena realizes that her personal healing has become a gift not just to herself, but to everyone her life touches. Each authentic choice she makes gives others permission to question their own patterns of accommodation and performance. Each boundary she sets models the possibility of maintaining connection while honoring individual needs. Each creative risk she takes demonstrates that authenticity attracts rather than repels genuine appreciation. The ripple effects continue expanding as Elena's story spreads through various networks, art communities sharing inspiration about healing, creative blogs, women's groups discussing the journey from people-pleasing to authenticity, therapeutic communities exploring the relationship between childhood conditioning and adult patterns. Elena's willingness to be transparent about her transformation creates pathways for others to begin their own journeys toward authentic living. Perhaps most significantly, Elena discovers that the community of authentic individuals she has helped create becomes the foundation for her own continued growth. Surrounded by others committed to honesty, self-awareness, and conscious relationship, Elena finds ongoing support for maintaining the changes she has made rather than gradually returning to unconscious patterns under social pressure. Elena's journey toward wholeness requires embracing not only the light aspects of her authentic self, but also the shadow elements, the parts of her personality she has spent decades denying, suppressing, or projecting onto others. This shadow integration represents the deepest level of her healing. The recognition that complete authenticity includes accepting and expressing the full spectrum of human experience rather than only the socially acceptable portions. The shadow work begins when Elena realizes that her lifelong people-pleasing has created an enormous reservoir of unexpressed anger. Beneath decades of accommodation and agreement lives a fierce woman who has opinions, boundaries, and righteous rage about being diminished, overlooked, and taken for granted. This anger initially terrifies Elena, who has built her identity around being the nice person who never causes problems, never makes demands, never expresses inconvenient emotions. Margaret guides Elena through exercises designed to help her safely explore this suppressed anger. They begin with physical expression, allowing Elena to punch pillows, stomp her feet, make sounds that carry the energy of rage without directing it at specific people or situations. Elena discovers that anger, when expressed consciously rather than suppressed unconsciously, contains valuable information about her boundaries, values, and authentic needs. As Elena learns to welcome her anger as a messenger rather than an enemy, she begins recognizing how much of her life has been organized around avoiding others' disapproval, not because she genuinely wanted to please them, but because she was terrified of their potential anger. Her people-pleasing, she realizes, was largely motivated by her own disowned rage projected onto others. She feared their anger because she had never learned to be comfortable with her own. The integration of Elena's shadow includes embracing her capacity for selfishness, not the destructive narcissism that disregards others' well-being, but the healthy self-interest that prioritizes her own needs when appropriate. Having spent decades automatically putting others first, Elena must consciously practice choosing herself, making decisions based on her own preferences rather than what serves everyone else. This healthy selfishness feels revolutionary and terrifying. When Elena chooses to spend Saturday afternoon painting instead of helping a friend move, when she orders the expensive entree at dinner because it sounds delicious rather than settling for the cheaper option, when she decides to travel alone instead of coordinating with others' schedules, she experiences both liberation and guilt. Margaret helps her understand that this guilt is simply the old programming protesting the dissolution of its power. Elena also integrates previously disowned aspects like ambition, competitiveness, and desire for recognition. Having learned early that these qualities were unfeminine or spiritually incorrect, she had driven them underground where they emerged as resentment toward others, success, and confused feelings about her own achievements. Shadow integration allows Elena to own her desire for professional recognition, to compete healthily with other artists, to promote her work with appropriate pride rather than apologetic minimization. The process includes embracing her sexuality and sensuality aspects of herself. The childhood conditioning had taught her to modulate for others' comfort. Elena had learned to dress conservatively, to minimize her physical presence, to apologize for taking up space in her female body. Shadow integration involves reclaiming her right to be beautiful, sensual, and unapologetically present in her physical form. Perhaps most challenging is integrating Elena's capacity for manipulation, recognizing how her seemingly innocent people-pleasing often functioned as a sophisticated form of control. By making herself indispensable through constant giving, by creating obligations through excessive generosity, by using her niceness to generate guilt in others, Elena had developed subtle but effective ways of managing relationships to meet her unacknowledged needs. Owning this manipulative capacity allows Elena to make conscious choices about how she influences others rather than operating from unconscious control strategies. She learns to ask directly for what she needs, rather than creating elaborate scenarios designed to obligate others to provide it. This directness feels vulnerable, but proves far more effective than her previous indirect approaches. Elena's shadow. Integration includes accepting her judgmental nature, the part of her that has strong opinions about others' choices, lifestyles, and behaviors. Having spent years presenting herself as endlessly accepting and non-judgmental, Elena discovers that her supposed tolerance was often performed virtue covering authentic reactions. Shadow work allows her to acknowledge her judgments while choosing how to express them appropriately. The integration process reveals that Elena's shadow contains not only difficult emotions, but also positive qualities she had disowned as incompatible with her nice girl identity. Her natural leadership abilities, her sharp intelligence, her capacity for fierce loyalty, her entrepreneurial instincts, all had been suppressed in service of appearing unthreatening and accommodating. As Elena reclaims these disowned aspects, she becomes a more complete, complex, interesting person. Her relationships deepen because she brings her whole self rather than a carefully edited version designed for maximum acceptability. Her art becomes more powerful because it expresses the full range of human experience rather than only the pretty, palatable emotions. Shadow integration allows Elena to stop projecting her disowned qualities onto others and judging them for expressing what she cannot allow in herself. Her capacity for compassion expands as she recognizes shared humanity in others' difficult emotions and behaviors. The world becomes less divided into good and bad people as Elena embraces the complexity that exists within every human being, including herself. Elena's transformation culminates in discovering alignment between her daily actions and her soul's deepest purpose, a coherence between who she is and what she does that creates profound fulfillment and meaning. This soul alignment represents the fruition of her healing journey, the natural outcome of clearing away inherited programming to reveal the authentic desires and calling that have been waiting beneath decades of conditioning. The alignment begins with Elena recognizing that her art serves a purpose beyond personal expression or commercial success. Through her paintings, she realizes she has been unconsciously documenting the journey from performance to authenticity, creating visual representations of the healing process that others recognize and find meaningful. Her canvases become mirrors where viewers can see their own struggles with self-acceptance, their own longing for freedom from limitation. This recognition shifts Elena's relationship with her creative work from something she does to something she is called to do. The difference is subtle but profound. Instead of painting because she is an artist, Elena paints because the world needs what flows through her when she creates from authentic truth. Her art becomes service rather than self-expression, though paradoxically, this service orientation makes her work more personally satisfying than ever before. Elena begins developing workshops and retreats that combine artistic instruction with psychological exploration, helping other artists identify and heal the unconscious patterns that limit their creative expression. These programs emerge organically from her own experience rather than calculated market analysis, flowing from genuine passion to share what has transformed her own life. The work feels effortless in a way that surprises Elena, who had grown accustomed to everything requiring enormous effort and constant pushing against internal resistance. When aligned with her soul's purpose, Elena finds that opportunities appear naturally, resources become available as needed, and collaborations develop organically with others who share her vision of healing through creative expression. Elena's romantic relationship with David deepens as she discovers how soul alignment affects intimate partnership. Instead of seeking completion through relationship, Elena brings wholeness to the partnership, creating space for David to pursue his own calling without the pressure to fill any gaps in her identity or purpose. Their relationship becomes mutual. Support for individual authenticity rather than fusion that obliterates personal boundaries. Together, Elena and David begin creating collaborative projects that combine his craftsmanship with her artistic vision. Functional art pieces that carry the frequency of authentic expression while serving practical purposes. These collaborations feel like play rather than work, generating income while fulfilling deeper purposes of beauty making and conscious creation. Elena's family relationships transform as soul alignment gives her the internal security to love her mother and sister without needing them to validate her choices or understand her path. She can appreciate their different ways of moving through the world without judging them as wrong or feeling threatened by their different values. This unconditional love paradoxically creates more space for genuine intimacy than years of trying to earn approval through accommodation. Her calling expands beyond individual healing to include community transformation as Elena recognizes how personal authenticity contributes to collective evolution. Each person who heals their inherited conditioning and learns to live from authentic truth becomes a catalyst for others' liberation, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond personal benefit. Elena begins hosting community gatherings focused on authentic expression and conscious relationship, creating spaces where people can practice relating from truth rather than performance. These gatherings become laboratories for new ways of being human together, ways that honor individual authenticity while creating genuine connection and mutual support. The alignment includes financial flow that supports Elena's purpose rather than requiring her to compromise her vision for economic survival. As her work becomes more authentically aligned, it also becomes more financially successful, demonstrating the principle that serving authentic purpose creates sustainable abundance more effectively than strategic pursuit of money. Elena discovers that soul alignment includes accepting her role as a bridge between the psychological and spiritual dimensions of healing. Her art and teaching naturally integrate practical psychological tools with deeper spiritual recognition of inherent worth and universal connection. This integration serves people who are ready for profound transformation but need practical pathways rather than abstract concepts. Her daily life becomes a seamless expression of her deepest values as the distinction between work and personal life dissolves into purposeful living. Elena wakes each morning with natural enthusiasm for the day ahead, not because every moment is easy, but because every experience serves her soul's evolution and contributes to her calling of facilitating others' liberation from inherited limitation. Soul alignment brings Elena to the recognition that her personal healing journey was never only personal. It was her contribution to collective healing, her way of serving the evolution of human consciousness toward greater authenticity, compassion, and freedom. This understanding transforms any remaining sense of selfishness about her growth into gratitude for being chosen to do this particular work of transformation and service. Elena's journey toward wholeness culminates in an experience of transcendent connection that dissolves the fundamental sense of separation that has unconsciously driven her need for approval and validation throughout her life. This connection emerges not as dramatic mystical experience, but as gradual recognition of her inherent belonging to the larger web of existence, a remembering of unity that makes external validation unnecessary because inner connection provides unshakable security. The recognition begins during a painting session when Elena finds herself so absorbed in the creative process that the boundary between artist and art temporarily dissolves. Colors flow without conscious direction. Forms emerge without planning. And for timeless moments, Elena experiences herself as pure creative force expressing through physical form rather than a separate individual, creating something external to herself. This dissolution of boundaries extends beyond artistic creation into Elena's daily experience of life. Walking along the coastal path she has traveled hundreds of times, Elena suddenly perceives not just the beauty of ocean meeting sky, but her own participation in that beauty. She recognizes herself as the ocean knowing itself through her awareness, the sky experiencing its own vastness through her consciousness, the earth celebrating its own magnificence through her appreciation. The transcendent connection includes recognition that her personal healing journey participates in a larger evolutionary process, the collective awakening of human consciousness to its true nature beyond the limitations of inherited conditioning. Elena's liberation from childhood programming becomes her contribution to humanity's liberation from ancestral patterns of limitation, fear, and separation. This recognition brings profound peace about her individual struggles and victories. Elena realizes that every challenge she has faced, every pattern she has healed, every moment of authentic expression she has achieved serves the larger purpose of demonstrating possibility for others. Her personal transformation becomes sacred. Work, her healing a form of service to collective evolution. Elena's sense of time transforms as she connects with eternal presence that exists beyond linear progression. Past traumas lose their power to define present reality as Elena recognizes them as temporary experiences within infinite being rather than permanent damage to limited identity. Future anxieties dissolve as she connects with the eternal now that contains all possibilities without being limited by any particular outcome. The transcendent connection includes communion with the Yod, wisdom of generations, both the accumulated learning of ancestors who found their way to authenticity and the potential of future generations who will inherit the freedom that Elena's healing makes possible. She experiences herself as a link in an eternal chain of consciousness, awakening to its own nature, each individual's healing contributing to the whole. Elena's relationships transform as transcendent connection dissolves. The fundamental fear of abandonment that has driven her people-pleasing patterns. Recognizing her essential unity with all existence makes the loss of any particular relationship, while perhaps painful, no longer threatening to her basic security. This freedom paradoxically creates deeper intimacy as Elena can love others fully without needing them to complete her. Her creative expression becomes channel for universal creativity, expressing through her unique perspective rather than personal achievement, designed to establish individual worth. This shift makes Elena's art more powerful because it carries frequencies of truth that transcend personal experience while remaining grounded in her specific journey and vision. The transcendent connection includes access to guidance that emerges from collective wisdom rather than individual cleverness. Elena learns to recognize the difference between mental problem-solving and intuitive knowing that arises from connection to larger intelligence. This guidance proves more reliable than analytical thinking for navigating complex life decisions and creative choices. Elena's sense of purpose expands beyond personal fulfillment to include conscious participation in universal evolution toward greater love, awareness, and authentic expression. Her individual healing becomes service to the healing of humanity. Her authentic living, a demonstration of possibility for others struggling with inherited limitation. The connection brings Elena to ultimate recognition, the love she sought through. Perfect performance has always been present as the very ground of her being. The approval she worked desperately to earn exists as her birthright. The belonging she feared losing was never dependent on external acceptance because it flows from essential unity with all existence. This recognition completes Elena's healing journey by revealing that healing was never about becoming someone different, but about remembering who she has always been beneath the layers of protective conditioning. The transcendent connection shows her that awakening to authenticity is returning home to herself while simultaneously recognizing that home is everywhere, always, because consciousness itself is home and she is that consciousness temporarily. Experiencing itself as Elena, Elena's transformation journey reaches its natural completion as she stands in her studio during the golden hour of evening, surrounded by paintings that chronicle her evolution from unconscious performance to authentic expression. The woman who once monitored every brushstroke for potential criticism now creates with the easy confidence of someone who trusts both her vision and her worth, no longer needing external validation to confirm what her inner knowing already recognizes as true. The canvases surrounding Elena tell the story of liberation, from the carefully controlled landscapes designed for broad appeal to the bold, emotionally honest works that carry the unmistakable signature of authentic voice. Each painting represents a layer of conditioning released, a moment of genuine expression reclaimed, a step toward the freedom that has become her natural state of being. Margaret, now more friend than teacher, visits less frequently as Elena has fully internalized the capacity for self-mentorship that awakened during their work together. Their relationship has evolved into mutual appreciation between two artists who have found their way home to themselves, who understand that the greatest gift one consciousness can offer another is permission to be authentic rather than advice about how to improve. Elena's cottage has transformed into genuine sanctuary, not the museum of appropriate choices it once represented, but living space that reflects her actual preferences, supports her creative process, and welcomes both solitude and connection with equal grace. Every object, color, and arrangements speaks to choices made from authentic desire rather than inherited should, creating an environment that nourishes rather than constrains her expanding sense of self. The relationship with David continues to deepen as both individuals discover how conscious partnership supports rather than threatens individual authenticity. Their love grows from mutual recognition and appreciation rather than need and efficiency, creating space for continued evolution within secure connection. Elena has learned that genuine intimacy requires maintaining rather than abandoning personal boundaries, that healthy love celebrates individual truth rather than demanding its sacrifice. Elena's work in the world expands naturally as her authentic expression attracts opportunities for deeper service. The workshops and retreats she facilitates create ripple effects of healing as participants learn to identify and release their own inherited patterns of limitation. Her art continues to sell well, not because she calculates market appeal, but because authenticity resonates with something universal in those who encounter her vision. The morning routine that once began with anxious scanning for flaws now starts with gentle appreciation for another day of conscious living. Elena wakes naturally, tends to her body with kindness, and approaches her creative work with the enthusiasm of someone who has found their calling rather than the desperation of someone trying to prove their worth through achievement. As twilight deepens around her studio, Elena experiences the profound satisfaction of a life lived in alignment with authentic truth. The script that once ran her adult life from childhood programming has been rewritten through conscious choice, creating space for experiences and relationships that serve her soul's evolution rather than maintaining patterns of limitation and fear. The journey that began with recognition of unconscious programming concludes with integration of conscious choice. But Elena understands this completion as beginning rather than ending. The commencement of lifetime dedicated to authentic expression, conscious relationship, and service to collective healing through individual awakening. As Elena's story completes its healing arc, the gentle transition begins between her fictional journey and your own real transformation, between the liberation she has achieved and the freedom awaiting your own recognition and integration. The patterns Elena released, the authentic self she reclaimed, the love she discovered, these reflect possibilities available to every human consciousness willing to examine inherited programming with compassionate awareness. Elena's courage to question inherited beliefs becomes your permission to examine the scripts running beneath your own daily experience. her willingness to feel temporarily lost while identifying authentic desires creates space for your own exploration beyond familiar limitation. Her discovery that worth exists independent of performance offers the same recognition to your own consciousness, still perhaps struggling with the exhausting work of earning what was always freely given. The transformation Elena experienced through conscious attention to unconscious patterns demonstrates the same process available to your nervous system tonight. As sleep approaches and the critical mind naturally softens, the healing frequencies carried within this story continue their work beneath conscious awareness, gently dissolving patterns that no longer serve while strengthening neural pathways of authentic expression and self-compassion. Elena's relationship with Margaret mirrors your relationship with your own inner wisdom, the part of consciousness that has never forgotten your inherent worth, that recognizes authenticity when it emerges, that has been patiently waiting beneath decades of conditioning for permission to guide your choices toward ever greater alignment with truth. The community Elena discovered through authentic living exists in potential around you, waiting to be activated through your own commitment to conscious relationship and honest expression. Each choice you make from authentic center rather than inherited programming creates ripple effects similar to Elena's influence, contributing to collective healing through individual awakening. Tonight, as consciousness prepares for sleep's restorative process, Elena's journey becomes cellular memory within your own system, a liberation, a blueprint for your own return to the magnificent being you have always been beneath every layer of adaptive protection. Like Elena finding peace in her transformed studio, your consciousness now settles into the sanctuary of approaching sleep, surrounded by the healing frequencies of authentic recognition and self-compassion that have woven themselves through story into the very fabric of awareness. The same coastal breeze that brought Elena clarity now carries your thoughts toward natural rest, each exhale releasing accumulated tension, while each inhale draws in the possibility of profound restoration. Your body begins to mirror Elena's final relaxation as muscles soften like watercolors blending on canvas, as breathing deepens like ocean tides finding their eternal rhythm, as mind quiets like evening settling over a peaceful village. The hypervigilance that once scanned the environment for signs of approval or disapproval naturally dissolves into the trust that comes from recognizing inherent worth independent of external validation. Elena's journey from performance to authenticity continues its healing work within your nervous system as sleep approaches. Cellular memory receiving new programming that whispers, "You are enough exactly as you are. Your worth exists independent of achievement." Authentic expression attracts rather than repels genuine love, and the script of limitation inherited from childhood can be rewritten through conscious choice and self-compassion, like morning mist naturally lifting from harbor water. Any remaining anxiety about tomorrow's challenges dissolves into present moment awareness that you possess everything needed for conscious living. Elena's transformation becomes a template within your subconscious. Her courage, your courage, her freedom, your birthright, her love, a mirror reflecting the appreciation you deserve to feel for your own magnificent being. Sleep arrives now with the gentle inevitability of tide returning to shore, carrying consciousness into restorative darkness where healing continues its sacred work, where authentic self strengthens its voice, where love dissolves fear through simple recognition of what has always been true. You are worthy of love exactly as you are, and tomorrow offers countless opportunities to live from this truth. Rest now in Elena's peace, awakening to your own